right, so every boss in Severance is supposed to physically and visually strike fear into the hearts of audiences. So, what on earth are we doing casting a small child in season two? What does actress Sarah Boss playing Miss Huang do to us as an audience? Amy X. Wang at the New York Times summed it up best in that Miss Huang plays on a visual shorthand for American audiences. And that visual shorthand is about a particular American anxiety in the workplace. She inspires fear, quite frankly, based off of ideas we have about second and third generation immigrants, specifically Asian immigrants and young Asian children. Even though none of us work at Lumen, there are aspects of the set and the show that play on these subconscious feelings we have about our own workplaces and our own identities in those workplaces. Because when you live in society, you live with society's collective cultural memory. And what forms that memory? Well, media, tradition, and policy. We see each other as individuals, but our brains do still sort each other and our experiences through these ideas that we have been socialized with. That information doesn't have to be based off of biological or true social facts or numbers. It just has to be based off of an idea, particularly a social story about who those immigrants are and what they represent. Perceived danger is sorted through our brain in less than a second. So Severance Season 2 cost about $200 million to make. I didn't see the numbers myself, but Screen Rant and IMDb confirm that to the best of their ability. So you can imagine with a $200 million budget, there was no accidental casting here. Miss Huang, being a young Asian American, underscores her exceptional poise and her ability in leading grown adults. That's because we're watching this with a stereotype in our head about the exceptional Asian tiger cub. It makes her role as a deputy manager believable, but also unnerving. When we meet her, we are given no explanation as to what she's doing here, right? Her capability is just assumed. We don't know if there are more children en route. We don't know if she's going to take over somebody else's job. There's just all sorts of anxieties because this is an unknown. Later, we discover that her deputy managership is tied to the fact that she is a Wintertide Fellow. But before the innies figure that out, and before we, the audience, figures that out, we just see a child running around performing her duties with absolutely no question from the other adults who are in charge. The innies treat Miss Huang with disrespect, and they are constantly trying to figure out why she's capable of leading them and what on earth she's doing here. This audience has a very lively Reddit presence, and there was a lively thread about, was Miss Huang a secret child of Gemma and Mark, because we know Gemma struggled with infertility and turned to Lumen to help her, or was that just a red herring? Of course, this devolved because the only link that anybody had to this theory was the fact that both Sarah Bach and Deechin are Asian. So this is a bit of a stretch because the only correlation is what they look like. Sarah Bach told Vulture that the cast was terrified working with her when she delivered her lines and worked on her scenes. Part of what makes her character so scary is that when you look at a child, or in this situation, the innies could look at a child and think, this is someone we could sway. But all that childlike devotion goes one way, and that is to the company. She is even less likely to question what's going on as opposed to the older innies. And even the innies themselves are modeled and act very much like children, and that's how the company is able to hold its grip on everybody. But to see someone even more far gone than them is very scary. Amy Wang points out that she is seen as a potential backstabber. She's seen as somebody who the company could exploit even better and then replace them in all their jobs. What does that sound like? We've talked previously when we looked at Sinners at how South Chinese communities migrated to America after the Civil War. Of course, the stereotype of the amazing Asian American immigrant child is not specific. It's not actually tied into a region. It's not tied into a particular history of settlement, but this generalized stereotype. And what's in our cultural memory? Oh, blaming Chinese immigrants for usurping and taking over jobs. Lots of you might know about the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, but you might not remember what led up to it. Policy tends to follow a political climate. And the political climate before this first major US law prohibiting an entire ethnic group of people from immigrating was one of intimidation and violence. And prior to that, in 1875, there had been a specific act prohibiting Chinese women from immigrating over because Americans did not want to see successful Chinese families. This wasn't because suddenly people decided that they didn't like Chinese people. It had to do with the fact that the gold was starting to dwindle and that the railroads had already been built. Once the Chinese immigrants had been used for everything that people could get out of them, they were no longer valuable. Millions of Americans saw the Chinese immigrants as great when they were cheap labor, but the second that they were people who wanted to turn around and use their wages to benefit themselves and their community, they were threats. When you have just young men immigrating over, they're healthy, they're young, they're not necessarily using any of the social services. They're not part of the fabric of society. But when they get older, when they have families, when they actually are part of society, that was an issue. These Chinese immigrants were not even entering a democracy in which everybody was allowed to freely take part in the economy and then live their best American life and live out their American dream. They were participating in a caste system that kept all the wealth and resources for the whites versus the non-whites, and the Chinese immigrants did not fall in that white category. Although they were colored, Chinese immigrants were allowed to have a few more economic breaks than African Americans or the diaspora of Black people, so they were able to build wealth. But that was not seen as them building wealth and reinvesting in their communities. It was seen as being sneaky. They stuck together and they took away opportunities from real Americans. But of course, an immigrant community is going to stick together when there's constantly slew of legislation coming against them that's trying to dismantle and break apart their families or burn down their towns. To see limited opportunity as something to prepare carefully for, to work together towards, is not sneakiness. It's not taking over. It's just smart. To see limited opportunities as something to carefully prepare for, to work together towards, is not proof of some superhuman Asian genetics that are like a danger to the American academic or economic system. It's proof of complex, regular old humanity. I cannot verify, and I don't think anyone's going to actually come out and say that the reason that Sarah Bach was cast was because she's Asian. And Amy Wang and I put out our arm and say, yeah, chop it off if she was not cast because she's Asian. No, we can't do that. Nobody has confirmed or proved any of that. But television is visual storytelling. And before Miss Huang even opens her mouth, before we hear her first line, we see her and then we feel something. As a deputy manager, I can assure you she unnerves us because of our stereotypes in a way that we wouldn't feel if it was a little blonde girl in pigtails or even a little black girl who we would see as more mature because of other socialization and stereotypes. If she was a little blonde white girl, she might have been seen as more innocent than she actually is. And if she was a black girl, she would have been seen as more grown. We don't feel as sorry for her when she has beef with Mr. Milchek, and we see them almost on an equal plane. Her ever-present smile and conviction towards Lumen is very similar to Mr. Milchek's, and yet when it's on her body, it unnerves him and annoys him in just a certain way. But all this crumbles when she is asked to complete her fellowship and smash symbolically her beloved ring toy. We see her as a child. The facade breaks. She is a child, not a threat, who just happens to be swept up in this system, this very culty system. And then we watch her, tiny and nervous, waiting for the bus to pick her up. She's being sent away. And the fact that we never see any other children, there's no other children on this bus, makes it very chilling and isolating. It turns her from this faceless group of people that are coming to take her jobs to this individual person. We cannot number the children. We don't know where they are. And the real villain, the real unnerving part, is the fact that Lumid would use a child in all her impressionable ways to advance their agenda. Amy X. Wang's piece is excellent. I would encourage you to read it because it helps us think about how Asian American exceptionalism is not the economic threat. The true evil is the capitalistic system that will use an immigrant within an inch of their life and then pit them against other people. When we look at stories about Black excellence or Asian excellence, one is told through the lens of natural proficiency and one is told as being a dark horse. But both of these stories of immigrant or Black excellence can be exploited because they're very useful for myths about labor. How do these stories hide these racist or classist ideas about who's a good immigrant? Severance continues to ask us, who are you? And it is fascinating to watch the different ways they try to answer that.